Hello everybody, you're watching Violin Lounge TV, and in this episode we're going to talk about musicality, about telling your story in music and expressing your emotions. And this is something that's possible for violin players of all levels, and I've invited Emily Williams here. She's the author of a book series about musicality for strings to talk about this. Hello Emily, welcome. Thanks
Hi.
for being here.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do with the violin?
Sure. Well, I'm a teacher and I teach in Mississippi, and I have a studio of violin and viola students, and I also play with the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra. And one of the things that I do as a teacher is create a lot of my own materials. And so I've written The Beginning Violinist. That is a book for beginning string students. It's available for violin and viola students, and that's the book that I use with my beginning students, and I take them through. And I also have created an online course, Strategic Strings, and that's an online course for teachers, teaching them my approach to pedagogy so that students have a really good foundation and basis, because I often see that students coming to me that there's holes in their learning, and I don't want holes in my students' learning. So I created a way of teaching that is effective for me, and often beginning teachers, I think it's helpful for them to have some kind of structure to what they do and some place to bounce from in their own teaching. So I do have that course as well. And so then most recently, I finished a book series on musicality for strings, and this is incorporating musical playing into students playing at every level, and it involves technique as well, because those things are just very interrelated. And so that's what we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, very interesting. For the viewers who might not really have a fixed idea of what musicality is, can you give us an indication or definition what you mean by musicality?
Sure. So musicality is generally what I think of when we decide what we're going to do with the notes and the rhythms that we're playing. So music isn't just taking a piece of music and learning the notes and rhythms correctly and getting through it and moving on to the next piece of music. The musicality of what we do is really what makes music speak to people, why we love music so much. In the book series, I talk about music as the universal language. Music speaks to everybody regardless of what country we're from. And there's a reason that it does that. And so I think students will enjoy their lessons more when they are making music and not just learning notes and rhythms. And so one of the things that we often do is just wait to teach musicality and phrasing until students are intermediate or even advanced players. And I think that's a mistake, because I think that our students will enjoy their lessons more and get more out of playing if we introduce it early on. And not only that, I think technically it provides the foundation they need to be musical players when they get into the intermediate and advanced stages. And we're going to give them the foundation of the tools that we use to play musically.
Yeah, and I think it's also a mistake. This is a topic that isn't really taught, because I think a lot of teachers don't really know how to teach this, and I think a lot of students think that this is talent or magic or whatever, and that it should naturally come when they play more advanced pieces. Well, the reality is that they kind of get soaked up in the technique, and just do the technique and think, if I master the technique, whatever that means, they will suddenly sound very musical, or then they have the room for expression. So I think it's very interesting that you wrote a book series in 5 levels, so you really have the musicality from the start. And I think what's also a misconception is that a lot of violin players do feel something with music, otherwise you wouldn't pick up the instrument. I mean, people watching, they surely feel something with music, otherwise they wouldn't be interested in this interview. They wouldn't be interested in playing a musical instrument anyhow. So can you tell us a little bit more about how to have this freedom, how to express yourself, and that it's not just feeling it, but that you really need to learn some things before you can do that?
So the idea that musicality is just either something that happens or doesn't happen, I think that's a myth. We all have emotion, but we all have natural different levels of skills at expressing that emotion through our instrument. So the problem with relying on musicality just to happen, or it occurring through osmosis or copying or something like that, is that the student never really learns to create musicality that they aren't inherently feeling, or that they have feelings, but they don't know how to technically make those feelings come out through their instrument. So some students will come by it more naturally, and other students don't come by it naturally. But that doesn't mean that they can't be taught to be very musical and expressive. As a student myself who struggled for years to play musically, I felt the music inside, but I didn't know how to get that out through my instrument. So it wasn't until I had a teacher who explained like the nuts and bolts of how to play musically, how to produce different sounds with my instrument, and then how I could take those sounds and create different effects. And so that's really what I share through the Musicality for Strings book series. And I've also expanded it so that musicality can be learned from the start of a student's studies. And I just make it very step-by-step. It's very, it's easy to understand and easy to apply. And that gives students much more versatility and ownership of how to play in a musical way rather than leaving it to chance.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely something, just as any other skill on the violin, that we really need to learn. In the book, you describe that musicality consists of tone, phrasing, and effect. Can you go a little bit deeper in those three components?
Yeah, sure. So the tone, these are the three. I divide musicality into these three areas, and then throughout the book series, each book goes into these three areas for each level. So it's very systematic in that way. So the tone refers to the quality of sound that a student produces. And that can vary from light and airy to harsh and edgy. And in between that, we have a nice strong focus tone. And that's what I like to start students on. Next is phrasing. And that's what I define as interpretation, or what we do with the music. And it includes your tempo and your dynamics and the form of the piece. There's lots of aspects to that. And then the third is affect. And affect are the things that we add to notes, things that enhance the notes. So you can think of articulation or vibrato or trills, even the fingering that we choose or the bowing that we choose, how we shift. All of those things are affects, and all of those things can be used in a musical way or an unmusical way. And all of those things are choices that we have to create different results. And so within each of these, we have all of these options, and then there's really so many, you combine all of these together, and you have infinite, really, possibilities of how to create a musical performance that's all your own. And so this is how I approach teaching students how to play musically.
Yeah. And do you have perhaps tips for students that are listening on how to get started with this? Perhaps on different levels, because I can imagine that it's very different for different levels.
So first of all, I think that while the book series is written for teachers and explains how to teach students these concepts, because of the way it's laid out and the detail that it goes into, while it goes into detail, you don't need some kind of like special music degree to understand this. Mm-hmm. So it's very simple. And so I think that, first of all, if you're a student and you're listening to this, you could definitely benefit from going through the series and reading how to do these things, because it's not rocket science. It's not some magical thing. It is very simple if you know what to look for and you know what to listen for and you know how to execute those things. So one of the things that I have seen that makes the biggest difference in a student's ability to play musically is just simply developing a focused tone. This is something that I see as a deficit in many, many students. And so I define a focused tone by one that is ringing, that we want to set the string vibrating to its maximum capacity. And that's something that can be done in any dynamic. So it doesn't mean that you have to play loudly. So it can be done in a piano dynamic or a forte dynamic. And that in and of itself can make a huge difference in a student's ability to play musically. That's the foundation. A focused tone is the foundation for all our tone colors and what we choose then to do with our sound. Yeah. The second area that can make a really big difference for students is learning how to play the basic bow strokes. So the détaché stroke, the staccato stroke, the spiccato stroke, and the legato stroke. Learning those 4 basic bow strokes correctly. Often students are not taught how to do those correctly, and I go into what correctly means in the book. But just being able to simply execute those with a focused tone it's like night and day difference between a student who knows how to do that and a student who doesn't know how to do that at the same level. It doesn't increase your level necessarily, but just night and day difference in the musicality that is expressed when those things are executed that way.
Yeah, because a lot of expression, I think, is in bowing technique and, with that, the tone creation. And perhaps that's something that people don't even pay attention to, because people are so busy with what notes to play, if it's in tune, if it's in the right rhythm. A lot of teachers focus on this as well. And when they master this in a piece, they kind of think they finished and then go on to the next piece. So can you maybe share a little bit also about the choice of repertoire for a student, that maybe students want to go too fast and they miss the bit where they can stand above the technique. So in choosing repertoire for my students, I guess one of the foundational principles that I use is, can a student play this piece with quality? So it's not just about can they play the notes and the rhythms, but at the end result, do they do that with a quality effect? And if the answer is no, that the music is too difficult for them to do that, then I would say that that level of repertoire is too hard for them. Yeah. So we want to challenge our students, but we shouldn't be challenging them in ways that they can't actually succeed at doing. The other thing that I address in the book series through each level, so as you move from book 1 into book 2, and into book 3 and so on, I give a bullet point list, and I say, if your student can do these things, then they're ready for this next level. So you don't have to play any guessing games about what level is my student. You can take the book series and you can pinpoint, this is where my student is, and then you can take them through the book and address the things that are in that book. And I give you things to listen for and things to look for to know when your student has mastered those items, those tools, those skills. Yeah, because if you don't really have the toolbox for expression, like you just mentioned, the various bow strokes and learning to do them correctly, not just sort of. For example, I see students that think they know spiccato, for example, but they can only do it in one tempo. They can't really switch back and forth, and not at all do some kind of sound coloring or proportions or whatever. Is that what you mean by learning it correctly? That you actually can not only do it in one way, but really apply it to music and have those different sound colors, perhaps? Bigger palette?
That's definitely a large part of it, is being able to have the control over what you're doing. And I also approach, one of the things that I think for teachers, it's like, we're already doing so much. We probably have about 30 minutes a week with our students. So the question maybe often arises, well, how am I going to incorporate all of this musicality teaching when there's so many other things for the student to learn? Because I certainly we don't want anything to fall in between the cracks. So my answer to that is, I'm not adding anything that you have to teach, so it's not going to take more time. What I do throughout the book series is show how you can teach what you're already teaching, the basic concepts of note reading and rhythm reading and playing the bow strokes and all of the things that you're already doing with students. and just do it in a musical way. So it's more of an approach of how you teach rather than saying, oh, in addition to teaching all these other things that you have to teach, now we need to add musicality on top of that. So it's just a way to get better, more effective results by teaching a different way rather than adding something on top of what you're already doing.
Yeah, because in the book you really treat everything around the bow strokes, vibrato, fingerings. They are all kind of known subjects, but it's perhaps in a different way. Can you share something about a different way in which you would teach a beginner or intermediate advanced student a topic? And maybe demonstrate a little bit of the difference between the traditional teaching or the teaching that you see perhaps causing gaps and the teaching that you advise in the book series.
Yeah, sure. So for beginners, and I think this is a really good example, for most students learn the détaché stroke first. So that's just, you put weight in the bow, you draw the bow, and you don't take the weight out, and you just go back and forth. So then when they learn the staccato stroke, often the staccato stroke is taught as an interrupted détaché, which would sound like this. However, that's not very musical. I mean, a professional player would never play staccato like that. It doesn't sound very good.
Yeah.
So what I introduce is just learning the staccato stroke, but in a musical way, which means that we start with weight in the bow, but then instead of keeping it there, we release that weight so the string can ring, the string can vibrate. Then you put the weight back in before the next stroke and you do the same thing. If we do that, then you get this result. All of a sudden, that sounds much more professional, but a beginning student can learn how to do that. So when you teach things in the correct way, then students automatically sound like they are at a much more advanced level than they are. They're still beginners, but they sound so much better. And you're doing it musically. So that's one example.
Yeah, and that's perhaps what you were referring to with the wrong way to teach or the right way. That a lot of times martelé is taught as détaché with stops. And then they think that the student needs to learn how to stop the bow and get it control, which is useful. But which isn't a separate bow stroke or whatever that you actually use in repertoire. And learning martelé the right way with kind of releasing the bow is actually martelé. So that's the only way to do that in that way. Yeah. And for intermediate students, do you have perhaps another example?
Well, maybe what would be most helpful to kind of go through. So I have at the beginning of book 3 that's the early intermediate student. And so I give a checklist kind of what these students should have accomplished through books 1 and 2. So a strong focus tone, like we've been talking about, comfortable using détaché, staccato, and legato strokes, comfortable playing in all parts of the bow, both fast and slow, understanding how to execute even and uneven bow distribution musically. So that concept there, the idea of bow distribution, oftentimes beginning students don't really understand what bow distribution is, or that they even have to be concerned about it. And oftentimes intermediate students, because they haven't learned that from the beginning, they play with poor bow distribution. And if they just played with a good bow distribution, then the musicality would kind of take care of itself. So one of the examples is this bowing, or this rhythm, where you have this. Yeah, so if you just let a student play that rhythm, they're going to probably execute it like this. So that's uneven bow distribution, which is actually more difficult than even bow distribution. So if a student executed that rhythm with even bow distribution, it would sound like this. Which is inherently more musical. The longest note gets most of the bow, the shortest note gets the least amount of bow. So when we simply understand the concept of bow distribution, how to teach it properly, or as a student, how to use it properly, all of a sudden our playing becomes more musical, and we really haven't done anything magical or spectacular. We're just understanding how to use our instrument with what's on the page.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good example, and I think it also just takes the patience and taking the time in your practice session to not only look at playing notes, because people don't want to play notes, but that's what they tend to do, actually.
Yeah. I think because that's generally how we're taught.
Yeah.
So it's a very simple change to go from thinking we have to learn notes and rhythms, but thinking about how do we learn those in a musical way. And the result is so much more fulfilling when you do it the other way.
Yeah, because it's what we all long for, but a lot of people feel everything, but they don't really get to express it. Can you perhaps for the viewers, as a last thing, perhaps give a tip on how to incorporate this in their practice?
What I'm introducing in the book series is not, let's take and break down musicality into step-by-step fashion and then make it mechanical. So we want to connect with feeling. We want to feel it inside. We also want, though, to connect with that feeling to our instrument. And I think that's often where musicality gets lost. We often feel music inside, but students have a difficulty expressing that and getting that out through their instrument. So we want to be able to feel the music inside and have that come out in our playing. So oftentimes I'll explain to my students here, this is what I want you to do. I'll demonstrate it. Here's what it sounds like. And they'll still have a problem with getting themselves to execute it. So I often suggest that they record themselves. Yeah. And it's amazing what a student can do in a week, just simply by recording what they are playing and listening back and hearing the results or the non-results that they're getting. Yeah. And then they can take the technique and the tools that I've said, hey, do this with this phrase, and they're all of a sudden able to apply that because what they think is coming out of their instrument isn't actually what's coming out. So just the idea that as a student, I think one of the greatest tips that I could give you would be to record yourself, and then you'll be able to hear whether or not what you think is coming out of your instrument is actually coming out, and to connect physically with your instrument, to feel when you're getting the aural results that you want, when you start then hearing, oh yes, I am playing more musically, what does it feel like to do that? The connection between the bow and the string and the fingers and the string. Because that's really where you're going to gain insight into yourself and be more connected emotionally with this external thing that we have to do to produce a musical performance.
What I notice a lot with students who record themselves is that, for example, with dynamics, they think they're doing all kinds of stuff, but then they listen it back and it's kind of flat. So you, just as an actor on stage, you need to exaggerate expressions, and you know, what gets communicated is a lot less than what you think you are putting in the instrument.
Yes, definitely. The other thing in the later books that I go through with musicality for advanced students, later intermediate and advanced students, is the idea that how do we teach them how to interpret music for themselves? So we give them the tools, but I also give you a very step-by-step approach on this is what you look for in music. So this is what you'll physically see on the page that indicates where the most important note in the phrase is. And I break phrases down into phrase segments. And we say, now this is what you do with a phrase segment to augment your phrase. And then breaking it down in even further to what do you do with a particular rhythm, think sequences or things like that. So that students have these tools that they can use to make musical choices. And at the beginning, their musical choices may not always be the best choice, but they have a foundation in order to do that that can then be honed so that they then can understand why another musical choice might be better. But what you're going to avoid is wrong, quote unquote, musical choices. If they follow the rules, they will be making a choice that is musical. And I relate that similarly to if you are we all learn grammar in school, we all learn sentence structure in school. We don't expect to make children into great writers by just saying, hey, we're not going to teach you any rules. So we give students the rules and the tools of grammar and vocabulary, and then we allow them to use those tools to express themselves through writing. And so I approach music in a very similar way, that when we give students from the very beginning the tools they need, they'll be able to use that to express themselves in a meaningful and genuine way.
Yeah, that's very nice words to end with, I think. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your tips and knowledge. And,
you're very welcome. It's always my pleasure.
Good. I'll link to the books below for those that are interested in buying them. They're a download, so you can buy them from all over the world. Do you have something to add or something to say or announce?
You can. The introduction to book 1 is free and available on the website, so you can click through and just read that, and that has a lot of information in it. And also for a limited time, you can get 10% off the book series, and the books are available either as a package, which you will get a cheaper price if you buy a package, or individually. So go check it out.
Yeah, check it out. So they are very interesting, and a lot of topics are described there. So I definitely enjoyed reading it, and definitely got some things about teaching musicality. So thank you very much, and well, until next time.
That sounds great.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.